welcome to this episode of Global Women Enrichment Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about our hometown of Florida. Not just the town, but the entire state. So one really cool thing is I'm born and raised in Florida. I've gone to school in Florida, supporting my FIU, and it's so interesting because you're taught a lot about Florida as you're growing up. I grew up through the public school system and parochial system, and it was a strong emphasis on who we are in the state of Florida. But when you start digging into it now as an adult, some of the stats were really, really interesting. So I'm going to get a little bit nerdy with stats to begin with. It's really interesting. From 2010 to 2020, based on the U.S. Census report, we grew from 18.8 million people to 21.6 million people in the state of Florida.
10 years.
In 10 years. And so I don't have what the flux may have been coming into 22 because that's not published yet, but it'd be interesting given the pandemic and all the folks that were moving here in these last couple of years to see what that number is actually going to be like. 60% of the population in Florida sits between 18 to 65 years old. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, that's a lot.
There are 21% of the people living here are born outside of the U.S. And when you look at the whole population, 91% of residents in Florida are U.S. citizens. And I wouldn't have thought that, right? We're so known for so much migration here that I thought that citizenship level would have been lower, but really interesting. And the other thing that I found interesting, I was talking to you, Vinoria, about it earlier, is when we start looking at the median income and who gets paid the highest wages, Native Americans are paid the highest wages in the state of Florida, followed by Asians, followed by whites. They just gave what the top three were in the data. So I also found that to be really interesting. The three largest schools, two of them are university from a higher level education, UCF and FIU. FIU grad. And the other thing that I also found interesting, not a great thing, I will call out, is the level of poverty. Now, when you compare it to the national average, it's actually lower than the national average. The persons living in poverty are at about 12% of the Florida population. The largest group within that are women 25 to 34 years of age. So, we are better than the rest of the U.S., but still not a great stat to really look into.
Do you know if that's the same thing as what they call poverty level, or is it the literal living in conditions that are substandard?
It's poverty level, what's defined as poverty level, right? So when I read that, I thought to myself, well, that's a pretty low bar to begin with. And if you think of just the key metropolitan areas within the state of Florida, I am sure, given the cost of living in those areas, that there's probably more than that 12%. But I couldn't prove it. It's just kind of a gut feeling that we know how much it costs to live in Miami, for example. And I would think if you look at those metropolitan areas, if you take Miami, the Tri-County area around here, you take Orlando, you take Tampa, Sarasota areas, and even Collier County. Collier County is one of the highest median income places. So it's not cheap to live there either. I would think that number would be a little bit different. And so, interesting things, right? A lot of folks love Disney World, right? And that's a main attraction for us here. But you also have Universal parks, and you have a lot of other entertainment that draws people to the area. We're a high tourist type of Florida hometown, and tourism makes up a lot of the dollars that we bring in. Going back into the Florida history, it's really interesting. So this is just... It was a fun fact. Like when you think of Disney and you think of the princess stories and everything they put there, as I was doing research, it actually showed that the Pocahontas story wasn't actually the first Pocahontas story. The first true Pocahontas type story where there was a non-native coming in with the Native American Indians actually was a Spaniard in Florida that was about to be killed, and the daughter of the chief saved him. It was not a love story, but she saved him. And so the story goes that someone else heard about it, and then the story continued, and then it became the Pocahontas story. So I thought that was interesting, doing some research on Florida. I would have never known.
So just to change it around a little bit, if I'm sitting somewhere in the Caribbean and I'm trying to make a decision as to should I go to Florida, should I go to New York, what is the one thing that you would say is the main attraction that I should consider moving my family to Florida?
The cold, hello, you're coming from the Caribbean. If you want to kind of keep it in the same type of, conditions, climate that you're accustomed to, absolutely Florida. And there's so much diversity here as well, depending on where you go. So if you don't want to be freezing and shoveling snow and dealing with all of that, Florida is the place to be. I mean, that's why we have so many, snowbirds that come down and winter here. That's why we have so many people that decide to come from the north and retire here. So unless there was a job reason that you had to be up in New York, then why would you?
Okay.
Right.
So what about the food?
Well, listen, the food in New York and here is just as diverse. So you can get just about everything in both areas.
But to your Caribbean conversation, I think what you can find in Miami from the islands, from Cuba, from Jamaica, there's so much to learn about all the little pockets of diversity that are right really in our backyard, in our back pond, in our back ocean, whatever we want to call that there across the lake a little bit. And so I would say that's probably different than New York.
Yeah.
They have different diversity up there in food.
And the beaches.
And the beaches.
Yeah.
So, Angie, you were born in Florida?
Born and raised.
So tell us a little bit about your Florida feel.
My Florida, when we talk about history, it's interesting because I feel distance from the history. I remember in 4th grade, we had to take Florida history here and had to do a project and put the seal on it and learned about the Spanish influence in Florida. Ponce de Leon. I remember my teacher made us say Ponce de Leon. I remember that. But my Florida, it feels the same and different now. It feels both. It feels like, we have evolved over time. We have had a lot of influence from other cultures. We're extremely international. And when I look back, I think, there was some of that in my classroom in my elementary years. But now I feel like there's been a huge shift. We're more international than not. And sometimes I feel like I guessed.
Yeah.
Specifically in Miami, I feel like a guest, and people say, born and raised?
Right. That's what
really?
people say all the time.
But you don't look like it. I'm like, what is that supposed to mean? Yeah, but my Florida's been kind to me. Found my Cuban husband in Florida. And, I think any place you live becomes what you make of it. The opportunities you take from it.
Yes.
How you just want to live your life in anywhere. But I've seen it change. I've seen some things come down, and specifically in Miami, there used to be like this huge snake sculpture statue thing on the top of a building that used to be the Serpentarium. It was called the Serpentarium, and I guess it had
they
snakes?
moved it. It had snakes.
Okay.
But they moved that big cobra to the South Miami High School.
Correct.
So now it sits up.
Yeah.
But it was the Serpentarian.
Yeah.
Wow.
And if you live in Miami long enough or any place long enough, you'll hear stories about the students at South Miami and what they would do for pranking the things.
Exactly.
Anyway, that's a very specific story, but
well, and to your point, growing up here, I remember sitting on the front porch of the house I grew up in, and I could see into downtown Coral Gables, and I could see this little yellow dome. It was like a 3-4 story building. Well, now you can't see it anymore because there's been so much progress and so many high rises that have gone up in the area. The other thing in terms of this being hometown in terms of Miami, Florida, I don't know about you, but I grew up outdoors. right? So you talk about the Caribbean. It's different for our kids today, and I pushed mine out the door all the time because I wanted them to have that same experience growing up here. But we were out running around on the whole streets of our neighborhood playing with all the kids, all the different types of games that kids play when they're kids, not video games, even though we had them, but we were pushed outside. And it was great town to really grow up in. And we had so much, to your point, diversity, but climate that allowed us to be outdoors year round, playing
Right.
outdoors and being kids year round.
Right.
So
And the climate was one of the, actually, it was the determining factor when we moved here many
Yeah.
years ago, because we wanted the kids to be able to go outside and play and all that stuff. I love Florida. I've been to different states. I've been to different cities within Florida. I love me my Miami. Okay, so.
well, to that point, growing up, I think as kids, we all want to leave home, right, and go somewhere. And so I remember telling my mom, when I grow up, I'm leaving Miami. Well, as an adult, part of my job has been to travel extensively. And so in the beginning, I would approach every city by saying, okay, could I live here? And I would drive around and look at the neighborhoods and everything, and I'd be like, no, not this one. No, not this one. And little by little, I realized that in Florida, we have it all. And in Miami, we have it all. And so I couldn't imagine not ever having a home tie or a home base here.
I think when you say you visited other places, I imagine other people visiting us, right? And this idea of Florida and specifically Miami and, that South Beach life and that, and I think as a resident here, I hardly find myself in that South Beach life. Like there's another Miami. There's there's a lot of different pockets like you would find in any big city.
Exactly.
You go here for this, there for that. But having it all, it is just a drive to the beach.
It is.
It is just a drive to some strawberry fields where you can pick and farm, and it is just a drive to the nightlife, and it is just a drive to whatever faith community you want to connect. Like it really is. There's a lot.
Well, and talking about the diversity, it's really funny. I remember I had a coworker that was from North Carolina, came down. We were having a meeting at my house, and as we're driving to my house, I live in the middle of the city. He sees like a yield sign with a horse on it, and he's like, "Why do you have a yield sign for a horse in the middle of the city?" And I was like, "Oh, because we have horse country right down the street from where I live." And he's like, "What?" And I said, "Yes." And sure enough, here comes some, it was like almost like if I had planned it, right? Here comes some folks on horses riding down Miller Road. Wow. And he's like, "I can't believe that I am in the middle of the city and there are horses here," right? So we do have the flavor of a little bit of everything.
Next sign you'll see is the Gator sign, right?
Yes.
For crossing gators.
Crossing gators. So it's a great place to live. I mean, for anyone considering coming here, come join us. It is the most beautiful, beautiful place to live. And like I said, I'll always have a home base. I couldn't live, ever think of living anywhere else. I will live somewhere else, but this will always be home base.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I'm curious, the median income of the
Median
natives?
income was about $43,000 a year.
And the natives, you said the natives were first?
Oh, no, wait. No, for the Native Americans, their median income was actually higher than that. It was in right around 70-ish, I want to tell you, 68, something around there.
And then the Asians?
The Asians were right under that. But then when you jump to the whites, the Native Americans or Alaska Native Americans that are in Florida are making about $20,000 more.
I will mention something. We had opportunity to travel to the west side of the country for a wedding this past summer, and I did recognize that they are very affirming. I'm not finding the word, but respectful.
Yes.
To the natives.
That's
and
my next question.
and now that we're talking, even at orientation for FIU that I
Yes.
attended recently for my son, they took time to honor those that were here before the buildings were set up
Yes.
here and that kind of thing. So that may be something we're seeing emerge new to offer awareness for what has been before we thought started here was something else that started here, and
Yes.
mention that.
Out in the Pacific Northwest, that's a very strong philosophy where they actually have partnerships with the native Indians and they honor them that they're on their land and, you know, give gratitude and partnership so that the people who live there now understand the native contribution. And I was going to ask if we know what Native Americans we have in Florida.
You mean the tribes?
Tribes.
Yeah.
Obviously, we one of the ones that we see most often are the Seminoles,
Seminoles.
right?
Okay.
But there was, I'm trying to see if I can find
But
it
as a
here.
UM graduate, we don't talk about the Seminoles.
There were actually quite a few different tribes when it was founded, right? And so it was almost geographical, where you had, let's call it the Tampa area, where Tampa is now, then the Jacksonville area, then you had towards Naples, you had down here towards Miami, and there were quite a few different tribes. And if I actually had my readers where I could see this, I could give you the answer to that.
And I think for those of us who have matured and understand the gift of the natives, we can bring a sense of restoration and coming together, unity, if we respect those things, you know.
Yeah.
When we moved to Florida, we had a choice of moving to New Jersey or to Miami. And I guess Lance made the choice because I came to a job. I was interviewed in Jamaica for a job in Miami. But there came a time when I said, you want to stay here or you want to move to New Jersey? He says, we're staying here. And we have no regrets. We've been here longer than we've been in any other country. And because my father was military, we moved a lot. So we moved from Europe to the Caribbean. And Europe was Germany and England and other places. And then to Jamaica. And I think I only lived in Jamaica 14 years, come to think of it. And then I've spent over 30 years here. So this is home. You know, people say I'm going home. I'm like, I'm home.
I'm home.
You know, and my older son threatened me. I'm going to use the word threaten, that he's moving to California. I said, be my guest. Let me see how long it lasts. So he finally came and said, Mom, we're staying right here. Of course, this is everything you want. You get the Caribbean flavor. You have the diversity. You want quietness? Go somewhere here. You want loud? Go there. You want South Beach? Go South Beach. You can get everything here. And the food, as Venoria said, is just to die for.
Well, we live where people want a vacation.
Yes.
What better, what better
Exactly.
place?
You know?
Yeah, sometimes my
We
siblings,
live in the vacation set.
right. Sometimes my siblings get feel a certain kind of way because I refer to Florida as home.
Yes.
Because I lived here most of my life.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't know anything. A lot of things that they talk about, I'm like, I don't know about the Caribbean,
Back
the
home,
Virgin
yeah.
Islands. I don't know. I left. You forgot I left. I left a long time ago. So yeah, I'm a Floridian.
I've never voted in Jamaica. I've
Right.
voted
Voted here.
in the
Right,
United
that's
States
it,
of
yeah.
America.
Yes.
This is home.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's a beautiful place.
It's a
It
beautiful
is
place.
a beautiful place. Yes.
And I find that it's surprising when I travel, you say you travel, you don't realize how protected we are from the awareness that there is division, because here it's everybody is different and looks different. And even when you go, maybe it's a Miami thing, because maybe
I think it's a Miami
halfway up
thing.
Florida, you go, why does everybody look the same here?
Yes,
But you know,
yes.
but not here. So it's
Right.
not even a conversation.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's, I'm remembering that now. It's a striking difference about at least
It's beautiful.
my city.
Yeah. Well, being a women's podcast, we love our men too. We've heard of talk about that before. But being a women's podcast, I thought it would be good to kind of wrap it up in saying that, you know, back in the Florida history, when we started talking about commerce and all of that, one of the biggest landowners and cattle owners, because this is a heavy cattle state, was a woman.
I love it.
And she actually implemented different ways of putting up fences, right? Before people used to have their cattle roam free, and some of the things to really look at the health of the cattle. So just wanted to bring that up. And the other interesting Florida fact is, can be sometimes considered negative, is folks are called cracker. And so I grew up thinking, well, I'm being called cracker for one reason, right?
Oh my
But when I
gosh.
learned the real reason behind the term cracker, it actually comes from the cowboys, the Florida cowboys. They would crack the whip. They wouldn't whip the cattle, right? Because then you mess up your cattle. But they would crack it behind them to get them moving, and it sounded like a crack. And so when you had the migration and this woman had the cowboys that worked for her, not that you call them cracker, the whole population of those cowboys in Florida were known as crackers.
Wow.
So just wanted to leave us with a little tidbit of women have really had a huge impact in our industry and the growth of Florida. And, you know, some of the things that sometimes we think are divisive actually are a true term rooted in the history of Florida, not from a negative perspective.
Right.
That's helpful.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yes, of course. So thank you all. Hope you've enjoyed this episode, getting to learn a little bit more about our hometown of Florida and a little bit more flavor on the hometown of Miami. We look forward to seeing you next time. And remember, you can always find us online at GWEnrichment.com.